Okay, good morning everybody. My name is Fergal Cahill and I am the current Secretary of the Structures and Construction Division in Engineers Ireland, and we're co-hosting our event this morning with the Roads and Transportation Society. So just want to welcome you all here to the launch of Transport Infrastructure Ireland's publication system. It goes live this morning, so it's great to see so many people here. We're also webcasting this session this morning, so just a welcome to anybody that's watching online. And we're also going to record this morning's session as well, so if you have any colleagues that couldn't make it today, they'll be able to go back and watch it at their leisure. So just a little bit of housekeeping to start with. Fire exit is just the door that you came in there, and then also the door down here to your right. And just if you could check your mobile phones are on silent, you might just turn them to silent for the next couple of hours. I don't think you'll be able to get a signal anyway, but you just might check that. That'd be much appreciated. I'm just going to introduce our first speaker, Michael Nolan. For those of you who don't know Michael, Michael is the first Chief Exec of Transport Infrastructure Ireland. Prior to that, he was a member of the senior management team in the National Roads Authority, and he held many roles in there, was instrumental in the delivery of billions of euro of essential national road infrastructure. Michael spent most of his career in public service, and earlier in his career he also worked in consulting and contracting. Michael is a graduate of NUI Galway and Trinity College Dublin. He's a chartered engineer and a fellow of Engineers Ireland. So I'm just going to ask Michael to formally welcome you to this morning's proceedings.
Good morning, and thank you, Fergal, for that introduction. So this is, I suppose, our formal launch of the TII's publications, and this is, I suppose, a culmination of a lot of work over the last few years getting to this day, and it's just good news that actually it has been formally launched today at this event. So I'd just like to welcome you all here today and for the formal launch of the publication. Just for information, the publications are now available for information only during a transition period. And from the 1st of June, TI Publications will become effective. And from that date, TI Publications will be the source for all current and new standards and specification documentation to the design, construction and maintenance of national roads in Ireland. And the system also contains other TI technical documentation relating to TII services. So I'll just introduce the speakers for today. Helen Hughes, Director of Professional Services in TII, will give a background to the new system, followed by Gavin O'Donnell from ARP, who will take us through the implementation of TII publications, and then Gavin will give us a live demonstration of the system. And following that, Gavin will give a run-through of the implications for users. And then Helen will come back for closing remarks, and then we'll have a period an opportunity for questions and answers from the panel of presenters. So let me just start off by saying a few words about Transport Infrastructure Ireland. So Transport Infrastructure Ireland, or TII as it's now called, was established through a merger of the National Roads Authority and the Railway Procurement Agency under the Roads Act in 2015, which came into effect from the 1st of August last year. And our primary function is to provide an integrated approach to the future development and operation of the National Roads Network and light rail infrastructure throughout Ireland. Our mission the mission is to provide high quality transport, infrastructure and services, delivering better quality of life and supporting economic growth. And our vision is to be leaders in the delivery and operation of transport infrastructure to ensure that Ireland's national road and light rail infrastructure is safe, sustainable and resilient, delivering better accessibility and mobility for people and goods, and to be recognised as an organisation that values its people, customers and partners. That graphic there, I suppose, shows the transformation in our national road network from 2000 to 2010. Our mission and vision, again, we will continue to focus on the maintenance, operation and delivery of infrastructure improvements throughout the national road network and the Luas Light Rail Network in partnership with the government, local authorities, National Transport Authority and the private investment community. I suppose it is worth saying that having delivered, I suppose, a huge change in the national road infrastructure and the light rail infrastructure around Dublin, that we now have become an operator as much as a developer of new systems. TII has responsibility for the maintenance and operations of the country's national road network, inclusive of motorway and national secondary roads, totaling over 5,000 kilometres. These two main areas of responsibility make TII one of the country's leading infrastructure development and management organisations. And so just two graphics, that graphic of the M50 wasn't taken today or yesterday either. So our standards. The aim is to promote quality and consistency of approach in relation to the design and construction of road and bridge projects, and to achieve an appropriate balance of economy, safety, sustainability and durability on road schemes. And what were the drivers for change? One is the developments in international standards, keeping pace with that. Feedback from national road projects, that's through our stakeholder, local authorities, consultants and the construction industry. Conclusions of research projects, that we have a very healthy research side of our business. From industry, so we actually always keep our ears open for what's the feedback from our stakeholders on the consultants and the contracting side. Developments with NRA policies and compliance with EU directives such as CPR 2011. And now I'll just hand you over now to Helen Hughes, Director of Professional Services, to take you through the background to the publication system.
So, why do we set standards? Well, and what power does TII have to set standards? It's all set out in the Roads Act from 1993 and the various editions of the Roads Act. And the latest Roads Act, which was published in 2015, says that the authority may, in relation to national roads or proposed national roads, do all or any of the following. Subject to Section 15B, specify standards in relation to the design, construction and maintenance works to be complied with by a person, road authority or public authority carrying out such works. And I've read that several times, but yesterday evening when I was just re-looking at these notes, it's the first time I'd noticed by a person. So, any developer or a private developer or a house, somebody putting a new access onto a house would have to comply with our standards. So they have a legal basis and to comply with our standards. There is the only mechanism you can do that to be legal, is actually to apply for a departure and set out reasons why you're not. So the legislative background is very important. For example, we're not legally TII, although it looks after light rail. We're not legally allowed to set standards for light rail yet. So that may happen in the future, but currently the Road Safety Commission now, the Office of Railway Safety Regulation is in charge of that. So, brief history of road standards in Ireland. The National Roads Authority was set up in 1994, and at that stage the only available standards were the Ferris Ferber RT 180, 181 geometric design guidelines for mainline and junctions, and also there was some specification. We had the Green Book, and the DOE had specification for roadworks. And then we were embarking on a large motorway programme, and we really needed a suite of documents, particularly for design and build. So it wasn't good enough that we were moving away from employer designed road schemes to design and build schemes. So we needed a very prescriptive set of standards and specifications. And we looked at what was out there, and the easiest and the fastest way was to adopt the UK system. The UK Design Manual for Roads and Bridges, and the Manual of Contract Documents for Highway Works, which we call the Manual of Contract Documents for Road Works in Ireland. Because in Ireland we don't have highways, we just have roads, according to our legislation. So we launched that in 2000. And then in 2005 we decided, and that was hard copy publication in 2005, I took over the the standards area in the NRA at the time, and we decided to no longer publish hard copy, and we went web-based publication. And in 2010 we improved that access. We improved the web-based functionality, and now we're having a further modification 5 years later. But this modification is much more radical, because you're fundamentally changing the structure of the documents, which we'll go into. We also were watching really what the Highways agency, now called Highways England, are doing, and they're not producing. They'd stopped producing the same volume of documentation. So this actually was a catalyst for moving away from the British system. We have so many standards now where they were standalone NRA standards. So it was a catalyst for moving away from the UK system. So, and now we're launching the system today, which we'll go into in more detail, which is much more radical because it's not following the UK structure of the old design manual for roads and bridges and the manual of contract documents. So why do we want to develop this? And this is a culmination of 1 to 2 years. I think it's 2 years of work, being led by Albert Daly, who's head of standards and research in TII. Fortunately, couldn't be here today, but he's been working with Arup, and the main focus was we knew that we were having a new organisation, TII, and we wanted to promote a TII brand and move away from our reliance on the UK DMRB. We wanted to integrate standards with workflow, so really link standards with the life cycle of a project instead of having a thematic theme like drainage. Well, it's more linking it to what do you need to know about drainage at the early preliminary design stage of a project. So it was integrating standards. The move, which we'll talk about more, was integrating standards with life cycle. We also wanted to have a flexible system that in time could take on light rail standards and light rail technical documentation. So we have that. The structure is flexible now, and we could add those in the future. And we wanted a coherent and logical structure, because sometimes to navigate the old design manual was a little bit difficult. Before we embarked on this, we looked at what other countries were doing around Europe, and there was no consistency in approach. Every country was doing what suited them, so we had to really think of what suits us, and we think we've adopted that, and we did consult with other people as well in the roads industry. So the objectives is a simple structure that you can navigate easily. It's modular based, and it's also it's flexible, but it's linked to life cycle. We think that the web-based function is much more improved, that you can search much more easily based on themes, or you don't necessarily need to know the title of the document before you start, when you're doing the search. And it's an electronic and document management system, so it has much easier to search. So we look at the old system. It was very much discipline based. The old volume structure in the design manual and also in the specification was based on geometry, drainage, earthworks. They're all grouped, and we didn't really feel that suited the designer's needs, because we felt that moving over to project life cycle would be easier. So what do you need to do with what documents do you need at the earlier stage of a project, what you need to know when you're doing detailed design, the inception, and then really, as Michael was saying, we're very much becoming TII is very much becoming an operator and maintenance of the network. So we also need a very focused maintenance standards, and that they should be grouped together, because some organisations are purely doing maintenance, and that's what they need. in order to do their work. So the lifecycle activities from inception, design, build, operate, maintain, and decommissioning. So regrouping the standards depending on where they predominantly fall in the life cycle. So each of the documents that you'll see later is color-coded depending on which part of the life cycle they fall into, whether it's the inception, the planning, design, build, operate, maintain, or research. And they're color-coded, and we'll show you that later. So you'll know exactly which grouping they're in. So there will be some documents that fall into all life cycle. They're just general documents that don't particular life cycle phase, and they'll be in general. Planning and evaluation, design, construction, commissioning. We will also have documents in our new TII publications that are not strictly standards. They're just guidance documents or background documentation, like the project management guidelines, and we do project appraisal guidelines and things like that, which would really fit the planning and evaluation stage, but are not strictly legal standards. So the suite of documents will embrace other guidelines that are not, and the documents that standards will be indicated as such. And the modular structure that we talked about is very much linked to within the life cycle. You have the different themes or streams, as they're called, the technical streams, and some of them you'll be familiar with, such as earthworks and geometry and lighting and things like that, and drainage. And then there's going to be other streams that we will bring in, like we're going to bring in different archaeological documentation that we produce and environment into the publication system, even if they're not strictly standards. So just for example, you'll be familiar with some of these current standards, and when we were designing the system, each standard has to be linked with a certain phase in the activity in the life cycle phase. So the assessment, first of all, BA 16, the assessment of highway, bridges, structures, is part of our asset management and maintenance life cycle. So that would go in there. Cathodic protection for use in reinforced concrete highway structures is part of design, so it'll be grouped into that. And HD 18, road safety impact assessment, very much part of planning and evaluation. Safety ranking, part of construction and commissioning. And skid resistance, network safety ranking general, skid resistance, very much part of the management of the road network, and is in the maintenance life cycle. So we're launching today. We're going to have the standards website will not be effective until the 1st of June. We'll be discussing later in the presentation about implementation and the impacts on contracts, future contracts that you're designing at the moment, and Gavin will go into more detail on the actual setup and how you navigate the system. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Gavin O'Donnell. I'm an Associate Director in Arup. I'm a Chartered Engineer, and I'm the Project Manager for the Standards Commission that we've been working on for a while with TII. So I've been involved in the development of this new system, supporting Albert and his team. So what I want to talk about firstly is taking on from Helen's background, I suppose, the implementation of the system in overview, and then I'll go in and talk about the impacts on users and give you a run through in terms of a live demonstration and show you how the system works. So I suppose we're all used to NRA TDs and BDs and series 500, 900 specifications, technical bulletins, NRA TBs, RCDs, And so how we describe these documents going forward is changing, but the technical content of the documents themselves is not. So the NRA Standards website, which is the current source for all this information, is to be replaced on the 1st of June. It remains in place at the moment. It remains the effective source of all new information on the 1st of June, but at that point it will disappear and it'll be replaced by this new website, which is Tii Publications, and I'll show you the website in more detail. So effectively what we've done, as Helen has introduced, is just taken all the existing documentation and restructured it. It's a crude enough restructuring in the sense that some of them don't sit singly into one activity. They might have content that spreads across a number of activities, but we needed to make a decision that each document sat in one place and one place only. But what the system does is it allows us that flexibility to develop standards going forward in a way that much more closely aligns with TII's activities and the life cycle that assets naturally go through. As I say, we've taken the existing documentation, so at present with this launch and the information, the site available for information, it has all the content that is currently on the NRA Standards website. It's rebranded, and I'll show you what that looks like. And this is the first stage of the development of the site, is just to bring across all of the content of NRA Standards in that website. We will develop it going forward with new developments in the next few stages. And as I say, the technical content of the standards and specifications haven't changed in this move. So we have two parts to the system, and this is really important in terms of how we're going to refer to what are standards and what are not standards going forward. So the label we have for standards going forward is Tii Publications Standards in brackets. And everything that falls into that category is listed here, which would be the contents of the current NRA DMRB and NRA MCDRW. And it's an important distinction in that previously what was described as standards was only what was in the NRA DMRB. And what's important about this is that those elements that are requirements that are in the MCDRW and that get implemented through contracts are now considered standards, and they need to be treated in the same way with departures and all the rest of it. NRA GD 100 already required a departure in relation to changes to specification, but I think that this is probably a little bit for industry, so it's important to understand that, and I'll talk that through particularly in relation to the MCDRW later on in the presentation. What will be in the technical side of the system, so we'll call that Tii Publications Technical. At the moment it's just the technical stuff that's on the NRA Standards website, interim advice notes, bulletins, some research and technical papers, but going forward this is an area certainly that will expand in the short term with some light rail stuff and other technical TII information on the roadside as we populate it in the further stages of development. So just to look at what the documentation itself looks like, we've rebranded, we've added new covers, and we've added additional metadata in the system that it sits within. So we've got a new database, and we've attached more information to the documents that sit into the database so that there's more functionality in the web interface and you're able to find stuff and group stuff a little bit easier. So the database is set up on TII's SharePoint platform, and it's quite simple for us to interact with. And the new website is, as I've shown you, through that. So just to point out a couple of things on the document covers, the branding of TII and TII Publications is there. We've also indicated by colour, as Helen said, that we have given each of the activities a different colour, and so we're giving a very clear indication of which activity each of the documents sits in on the front cover, both at the top in terms of the small icons and at the bottom left with the activity. The title of the documents remains the same. In some cases there might be some very minor changes, but generally speaking the documents have the same titles as they had in the existing system, or they have in the existing system. Importantly, and I'll talk a bit more about it, they have a new reference number which is called the TII publication number. So what we know as the NRA TD9 or Series 500, those references, when the system becomes effective, will become historical references. So we'll be moving to using these TII publication numbers going forward, and this is probably the biggest change for everybody to get their heads around. When I describe how this has been put together, I think you'll find that it's easy enough to reference, but we all accept that it's going to be a bit of a step to get used to using these new references as opposed to what we're used to in terms of, say, NRA TD9, for example. And the other reference that's on the cover relates to the publication date, which is a very important control piece, which it is currently in the existing system. So that's important that's clear. And then finally, the different sets that the documents sit into, so whether it's in the standard set or the technical set, are very clear on the front also. We have produced inside covers then for each of the documents that are brought across, and there's some explanatory text as to what the new system and the new attributes are about, and there's a table that highlights all of the specific metadata. I know you probably can't read that, but it's not important to read it right now, just to say that all of the metadata that you can search the document against in the website is contained on the inside cover, so that it's there as a reference if you're looking at a hard copy and you want to go find something electronically. This just gives a flavor for the different colors on the different documents as we go through the different activities. So you can see the standard sort of TII branding has been slightly adapted and color added to give a little bit of context for each of the activities. So this TII publication number, the sort of 4 key parts of the metadata that are on the system would be the document title, which I say hasn't really changed, and then the activity, the stream, and the reference number. So the activity is, as Helen introduced, one of the 7 sort of pillars, and each of those has been shortened to a 2-letter acronym. The stream that it sits within, similarly, is the sort of generally discipline-based aspect of that document. And I'll talk a little bit more about how the streams are put together. And that's narrowed down to a 3-digit acronym, and then a reference number, which is a 5-digit number. And importantly, on the reference number, we've assigned those numbers so that they are essentially unique, with one exception, which relates to the way the manual for contract documents has been implemented, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But essentially for the general activity, we're using the 1000 series. For the planning and evaluation, it's the 2000 series. For design, it's the 3000 series, so on and so forth. So those numbers are unique in that respect. Other metadata that's attached. Importantly, the historical references that we're all used to using are still in the system, and you can still find documents based on those historical references. They'll be there up to the effective date, and then I suppose gradually in time those historical references will disappear as new documents are added to the system. But for a document that exists in the system going forward, it will remain until such time as that document's withdrawn. The document sets, as are referred to, standards or technical, and then the status of the document, whether it's published or withdrawn, and the dates that go with those references. This is just a quick screenshot of the database in SharePoint, just to give you a flavor. The website, I'm going to take you through a live demonstration of these. The website has a simple search which gives you a drop-down list, and then you can go and find the documents you need if they're sort of easy to find based on a very specific reference, or if you want to group documents based on all of the documents in a particular activity, or all of the documents in a particular stream across all the activities, or a mixture of any of those. We have a very functional and easy to use advanced search that allows you to group stuff together. The document, once you've done your search, whether it's simple or advanced, gives you a list, and you can export that list to a spreadsheet, and I'll talk you through that. And then when you get to selecting an individual document, you get to a document page. And in concept, this is very similar to the existing website, where each document has a page in its own right, and all of the archived versions of that document are available for access on that page. It's the same with this page. We've just expanded it to show all of the different metadata that's in the system for that particular document. So in terms of what's new with the new system, we've rebranded it to TII from NRA. We've introduced this new structure of activities and streams. There's a database which has expanded metadata. a new publications website, enhanced functionality which will allow you to group things and produce lists of documents a little bit more easily. The TIA publication number, as I say, which replaces the NRA standards references. And from a TII perspective, it provides a much more flexible system to add documentation going forward. Have I suppose a broader think about how documentation around standards should be developed going forward. So what stays the same? Initially, the technical contents, as I've said. The implementation of standards, apart from how they might be structured, remains the same, and policies around standards. The underlying processes that we work through supporting TII and how TII works internally in terms of the development of standards hasn't changed as a result of this. And the objectives around TII publication standards remain those core objectives that have been there right the way through what Helen has described in terms of the history. And I've just identified them there, particularly in relation to balancing economy, safety, sustainability, and durability. So going forward, some of the stuff that's in the system as technical documentation may ultimately come into the standard system, as would be the case normally, say, for interim advice notes. We'll be developing new standards and looking at the potential to maybe restructure some elements of the existing standards, and looking, as Helen said, about adopting some documentation that may be currently sitting outside of standards, either through a new implementing document or bringing those documents in, depending on how we want to do that. In terms of technical developments, there's a whole range of TII technical documentation that currently sits on the TII's library website, the library part of their main website. That documentation may be appropriate to come across in terms of how it aligns with standards or how useful it is for users to access it. So we'll be looking at that, along with other things like policy documents, technical notes, approval systems, or possibly the outputs of trials and pilot projects that are going on. So at this point, I just want to take you to the website itself and show you what it looks like and talk you through it a little bit. So the introductory pieces are kind of self-explanatory. What I would point to is there's a document linked at the bottom here, which I'll just click to the document page. It's called the Introduction to TII Publication Systems, and I open it up. It's a new document in the system, so we've put it in there. It doesn't exist in the NRA standards website, and it is subject to change because effectively it's only in the system at the moment for information. It will be a live part of the standard system when we are effective on the 1st of June. But this document is useful in the sense that it gives, and I'm not going to go through the details of it, but it gives essentially the essence of what this presentation is in terms of what the new system's about, how to use it, the functionality, just flicking through the contents here. And for anybody that hasn't made it to the presentation here or is trying to make an introduction to the system and find out what it's all about, that's a good starting point. So I'll just reference that. The recent changes pages is still under a little bit of development, so we have some of the more recent changes, but going forward this will be the place that you go to find the historical publications and the references to those. So for example, if I click on January 20, this is the typical alert that you would see from the NRA Standards website when documentation is published. So that will be there, and all of the historical references that are currently on the NRA Standards system will be placed in this place on the recent changes. And I just point to this March 2016 document, which is showing the new sort of summary of publications going forward, and it lists 6 documents. So 2 of these are new in the general space, one which I've just referred to, and the other is a document around implementation of policies and standards, and that's another important document to look at. The other 4 documents, 2 of which are updates of existing documents and 2 are new, are documents related to the Manual for Contract Documents, and I'll talk about those a little bit more in terms of implementation. The Who We Are page gives a little bit more background in terms of the publication system. Importantly, there's going to be an up-to-date current list of the documents in the system available through this link, and I won't scroll down through all of that. There's 600 or so documents and they cover 13 pages. But again, for somebody that might be looking to understand how do I find a particular document, what's its new number, what was its old number, this is a good place to start. And that's really all I need to say on that. going back to the home page. So in terms of the simple search, we have this simple bar which I can put in, say, NRA BD 52, and it gives me a list of documents, one of which is the historical NRA BD 52, and it gives me its new TI publication number and title, and it's also picked up a document which has 52 in terms of the new TI publication number. So if I click through to what was NRA BD 52, you can see it's got its document page, it's got its new document number, which is DNSTR 3011, and the historical versions of BD 52 are available. If I click through to BD 52, you can see it's a design document. It's got the relevant references on the cover. The inside cover has the content that I pointed to, and I'm not going to go through the individual pieces of this text. You can look at that in your own time. It's got the document attributes, as we referred to, and it's got a piece that I suppose guides you in terms of the historical references and how to navigate the system using that. And then what follows is exactly the same document that sits in the NRA standard system at the moment. It's not changed at all in terms of its technical content. As we run down through it, all of the same content is there until we get to the very bottom, and at the end we simply have a document rear cover which is consistent with the branding. So that's what you'll find when you go through the simple search. If I go to the advanced search, I have a number of options, and because of the way the functionality works, the first place to go is the refine by activity. And the refine by activity gives you basically all of the activities selected. So basically every document in the system would be selected at this point. If you want to reduce that, you click the activities off and you click in to an activity that you want, for example, the design activity. And then it selects the streams that sit within the design activity. So if I was interested in the drainage and the geometry and the safety standards within the system, under design, I would select those streams. And what I should point to here is there's an option to select the standards only, or the technical documents only, or both standards and technical. It defaults to standards and technical. There's also a date function, and what the date function allows you to do is to select a particular date. So I could go back to, say, 2010, July, 1st of July 2010, and what the system will do is give me all the documents that were effective on that date in this system. So if you have a contract that has documentation that relates to a previous date, you can select the date that you need, and then you can search, and the system will give you all of those documents. It'll give them to you in a list like this. In this case there is only design because that was the only activity we selected, but it will give you the list of all the documents. In this case there's 19 different documents. Some of those you'll find are withdrawn because they've been replaced by documents that were updated since 2010, and this will tell you which ones are withdrawn and which ones are published, and the published ones are the same documents effectively that were in place in 2010. And each of these is a live link then to the individual document that you can go to, and it brings you to the document page, and it brings you to the document itself, and so on. If I go back to the list, what you can do with this green link is you can download a spreadsheet which gives you that list of documents in a simple spreadsheet list, which is a little bit crude when it comes out, but you can quite easily turn that into a useful list. Has your list of TI publication numbers, your title, the activity, the stream, the publication date, historical reference, version type, and the document set that it sits in. And that then provides you with a list that I would point out. We've put a note on this output that is generated as a bespoke search, and the user needs to control what they do with that information. We were finding it difficult to make a full report out of this that would be dated and controlled in a way that, you know, might be useful, and we did recognize that, but that was providing a step, it was proving to be a step too far, and what we have is a useful list, but then the user must control that and make sure that they use it in the way they want to use it, or control it in the way they want to control it. So if I go back, when you have your list, if I can just go up here, there is that you can modify the list. So we can see here from what we've selected, we have the design activity and we have a number of streams. If we decide we want to drop the drainage stream, we can deselect the drainage stream and go back, and we can see that there was one drainage document that's dropped out of the system there, and that's now down to 18 documents. Or we can drop it further by dropping safety, and now we're down to 17 documents. Or we can select just the standards instead of all the standards and technical, so that's dropped further. So it allows you to modify the list and export it in whatever way you want. So I think that's probably as much as I need to show you in terms of the searching. We're retaining some of the things that are on the existing NRA standards website, so there will be a forward look. And this is just, we're still developing how this is going to look, but there's an indication of what documentation is likely to be published in the near future. And we have a link to the Partridge website, which is there on the existing standards website, and a link to the TII library where there are other TII publications. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go back to the presentation and talk you through implications for users. So I suppose this is an important first step, is that we have now got a definition for what standards are in this new system, which sits within one of these new documents that I've pointed to, which is the implementation and use of TII Publications Standards. So TII Publication Standards is a collection of documentation, documents and drawings that define the standard to be with in respect of the design, construction or maintenance of national road schemes in Ireland. TII Publication Standards documentation can be accessed through the online website and includes documentation containing mandatory requirements, guidance, advice and standards drawings. And you can see that this is very clearly linked to what Helen introduced in terms of the legislative reference. And what I would also point out is that the contents of the documents and the words that are in the documents are telling you what piece of those documents are mandatory or otherwise. In terms of the manual for contract documents, I think that's probably a little bit more straightforward, because we have the specifications, what was the method of measurement, and there's a change to the title of that, which I'll talk you through, and the standard construction details, as we're calling them now, instead of road construction details. Those three elements of the system are considered mandatory, and the other elements, which would be guidance in the existing system, remain as guidance, and that's very clear in terms of the way we've packaged the information, as I'll talk you through. In terms of what's currently in the NRA DMRB, there's a mix of advice notes and standards, and some of the documents contain a mix of mandatory requirements and advice. So it's very important that you know what's advice and what's mandatory in terms of the documentation that you're using, and if you have any queries on that, you should raise them with TII. So in terms of an implementation overview, as Helen said, 1st of June will end the transition period and this system will become effective. At that point, the NRA standards website will be withdrawn and won't be available anymore. So it is important that everybody gets familiar with this website, this new website going forward. We will also be no longer referring to the NRA's DMRB and the Manual for Contract Documents, which will be considered historical references collectively. The individual documents, historical references, will no longer be in use. Now, I need to talk you through the implementation phasing of this in terms of contracts, but effectively the new system will have them as historical references, and similarly for the Manual for Contract Documents, where we have Series 500 or notes for guidance for Series 500, they will be historical references from the 1st of June. The TII publication numbers will come into effect, and they will be taking over essentially from the historical references. The TII Publication Standards will be the new system title, and I want to talk particularly now about the Manual for Contract Documents, because the activities and streams generally follow a activity lifecycle stream discipline basis, but the Manual for Contract Documents is different because we felt they obviously have a collective way of working in terms of how they're implemented into contracts, and it was very important that we didn't interfere with the integrity of that in this first step, albeit there might be some changes going forward in terms of how things are done. So we needed to keep those groups which are currently the volumes of the manual for contract documents together. And so we've done that by grouping them streams within the construction and commissioning activity. We, at the time that we were devising this, and I suppose in order to keep it flexible for the potential for light rail standards to eventually come into the system, we modified the titles of what are currently the volume titles in the manual for contract documents, and the titles that we have now for those collective groups are on this current slide. So the specification for roadworks, we now have specification for works, and the 3-digit acronym for that is SPW. Instead of the notes for guidance to the specification for roadworks, we have guidance on specification for works, and that's GSW. Instead of the method of measurement and the guidance on the method of measurement, we have requirements for measuring and pricing. And I suppose it's important to note that it was important to emphasize the required part of the method of measurement, and that's particularly important in light of what's coming back into the scene with the Bill of Quantities becoming a part of employer design contracts through the Government Central Contracts Committee. And then we have guidance on measuring and pricing, which is GMP. And then instead of road construction details, we've moved to standard construction details. So just looking at the construction and commissioning activity, there are a number of streams that we envisaged may be possible. At the moment we have a small number of these, so they're not all currently in the system, but the ones that are important are the for works SPW, which was previously volume 1 of the NRA MCDRW, guidance on specification for works, previously volume 2, requirements for measuring and pricing, previously volume 3 section 1, and the guidance on measuring and pricing, which was volume 3 section 2, and then the standard construction details, which was volume 4, the RCDs. In terms of the TI publication numbers, there's a difference here also. Again, it was trying to facilitate users making the transition but having a familiarity with the way the system currently works with the NRA standards, the MCDRW. So you'll see an example of the documents that relate to Series 500 as the current system is. The typical way we've dealt with TI publication numbers is to retain the 500 numeric part so that it's I suppose easily identifiable. So what we have for the specification part of Series 500 is CCSPW 500, and then it works its way through each of the different parts of the system. So what was notes for guidance is now the GSW 500, what was method of measurement is now RMP 500, and what was notes for guidance to method of measurement is now GMP 500, and the RCDs have retained their RCD number effectively in the new TI publication numbers, but they have moved to SCDs. So for example, RCD 500/20 is now SCD 500/20. The documents that I pointed to earlier on that have been amended are these documents, so I just wanted to identify those. We have essentially what was the Series 00 in the spec, and the same for notes for guidance, and the introductory parts of the method of measurement and the method of measurement notes for guidance. These have been amended because effectively these are the parts of the system that implement currently the manual for contract documents into contracts. So the amendments here are essentially changing the references to the systems from specification for roadworks to specification for works, for example, and for all of the other collective systems. These documents bring those elements of the new system in, and importantly, in the preamble to the specification, which from the effective date needs to be brought into all contracts that will be put in place from that date. Those references are now updated, and similarly for the preamble to the Bill of Quantities, that those references are updated. As I say, these documents are in the new system only. They're for information at the moment. They're to allow everybody to become familiar with them, but from the effective date they will become full standards, and they are what must be complied with. And you can see that there's consistency of numbering on these documents as well. We've used the number 10 to have a consistent reference across each of the different parts. This just gives you an example of the type of change that's been introduced to the preamble to the specification in this case, where it now reads that the specification referred to in the contract shall be the specification for works, SPW, in Tii Publication Standards, published by Tii as a collective group of documents under the construction and commissioning activity within the online Tii publication system and reference to the website. So in terms of implications for users and what do you need to do right now, and the answer in terms of today is nothing. There is no effect on what is there at the moment. The NRA Standards website remains effective and will do so until the 1st of June. For anybody that isn't subscribed to the NRA Standards website, I think it would be good idea for you to subscribe to that. All subscribers to the existing standards website will be brought across and be automatically subscribed to the new site. I didn't point to it, but there is a place on the new site where you can subscribe, and obviously new subscribers will be adopted as well. There's no immediate effect on existing contracts. Any contract that's in place currently is running to the existing standard system, and all the references in the contract are as they are. So there is no change to that from today. Essentially, this launch is to make industry aware of what's coming and to help you to get prepared for that. So we would encourage everybody to use the transition period, to look at the website, to spread the word in terms of your own organizations, and particularly for people that are compiling documents, contract documents now or about to get into a tender process or to get ready for a new scheme. It's very important that you become familiar with this so that you are ready when the effective date comes in. From the 1st of June, all relevant contract documents, so basically contracts that haven't yet been put in place that are in a tender process, need to adopt this new system. I've made reference here to the 10 working days or 2 weeks prior to the tender submission date, which is the date that's in the preamble to the spec, which makes standards effective within a contract. So that's a date that people will need to watch. The 1st of June will be the effective date for the new system, so you just need to make sure that your contracts are consistent in terms of what's effective on the date of your contract effective date. And so what's expected from the 1st of June is only that those parts of the introduction to the system that we've updated, so the preamble to the spec, the preamble to the bill of quantities, and the references to the system as a whole, that those parts of the system are updated and are clear so that your contract points to this new system. It's not expected at that point that all of the individual references to TDs and BDs or series or those specific references, which will become historical, but the expectation is not that all of those will be picked up because they'll all be readily identifiable and found through the new system, but it needs to be the case that your contract points to the new system. And we are recommending, as would always be the case, that when you're making changes to your contract documents in preparation for tender or contract, that you just do a full check for any conflicts that this might introduce and make sure that they're addressed. Then from the 1st of January 2017, we are expecting that all contracts, all new contracts, as I say, from that point, will have had enough time to have updated and gotten used to the new system. We use all of the TII publication numbers, and there should be no more reference to historical references going forward from that point. TII is maintaining their base documents in relation to D&B PPP schedules and developing employer design schedules, and those will be fully updated at that point. And there will be obviously changes into the system, and I should say that there will be changes into the NRA standard system during the transition period. The process of developing documentation and the needs to react to changing circumstances continues, not least the change that's coming in relation to the public works contracts for employer design contracts. So there will be changes in the NRA standards website in the transition period, and we will map those all into the new system. And then from the effective date going forward, there will obviously be changes going into the new system all the time that will be alerted to people. And I suppose in this period between now and the end of the year, TII will be considering what sort of changes we want to make, maybe on a higher level of thinking we want to do around standards, and how to implement standards possibly in a different way, certainly more aligned with this new system in a life cycle basis. So that thinking will develop, and there will be further stages of implementing documents that aren't currently in the NRA standard system into the system. And then I suppose going forward, beyond the start of next year, this thinking that will be done over the next period will manifest itself, and I suppose that hasn't been sort of bottomed out yet, so I can't really say what way things are going to go, but I think you'll already get a sense that this new system provides TII with an opportunity to rethink really how to structure things and how to put information together to more closely match with the activities that are going on out there. And as Helen introduced, particularly maintenance and operations aspects. So I think TII will harness this opportunity, and certainly there will be departures from what you guys are used to in terms of NRA standards. And when we get to maybe 5 years' time, the documentation in the system might look quite different to what we have today, and I expect it will. So that's the picture going forward, longer term. So I'll just hand back to Helen now to make some closing remarks, and we can have some questions.
So there was a lot there to take in. It's I don't think it's anything we should be fearful of. I think, as Gavin said, in 5 years' time, we'll be looking back. At the moment, there's going to be a lot of new. I'm happy to see a lot of new graduates being taken on by local authorities and by our regional design offices and consultants. And to them, they'll never have heard of NRA TD9. They'll just start using the geometric design guidelines called DN, whatever the reference is. So it's obviously there's that transition, and the old historical references will be really history as we get more and more new designers into the system. So obviously I think the main thing will be for when you're preparing contract documents that you get the referencing right, and that'll be probably the more challenging bit for people who are currently preparing contract documents. So we're really there for any guidance that is required if you have any issues there. And I think we're very much linked. TII has representation in the Government Contracts Committee, so we're really trying to mirror what their requirements are, as we discussed, like in the requirements for the measuring and pricing documents now. So Albert and myself, Gavin, we're always available there to take any queries. There's going to be a question and answer session now. Possibly we both come up to the stand, will we? Or will we, because do we have mics or?
Yeah, what I was proposing to do was I was just, so the guys online can hear as well, if you just take a mic and talk into the mic, and I'll give you guys a mic as well, and if you just stated your name and who you work with, and then just ask the question. There's an awful lot of information there, so it might take a while to absorb that, but if you just stick up your hands if you have a question, and I'll bring the mic to you and then go from there. Any questions? Yep.
Philip Bayfield, CST Group. A question I've got, you talked about consistency in terms of getting the information out in the contract documents. Is there a guidance for documentation that's being prepared at the moment to ensure that there is consistency across the board?
There isn't any particular guidance that's being developed, but there's nothing that has changed in that respect, and maybe what you're pointing to is that there's a need for guidance to help people to understand better how to compile documents. Now I know that there are a number of things that are within TII in terms of reacting to, say, the public works contracts changes with the bill of quantities coming back in, and there may well be advice coming out in respect of that. But look, that's an important point. If there's a sense that it's not clear enough at the moment how contract documents are put together, how the elements that I've outlined that are currently in the manual for contract documents fit together into contracts, then that's something that we should take away and look at, because it's not currently on our agenda in respect of this system. So we'll do that. Thanks.
Another question, in terms of the bill of quantities preparation, you say that they are standard documents and that any variation from would require a departure in effect.
That's right.
In my experience, the method of measurement is generally prepared. There are numerous amendments to the method of measurement that deal with idiosyncrasies or individual requirements of a particular contract.
Yeah.
I have never seen a single document ever go out that doesn't have various amendments.
Yeah.
Does that mean that there will have to be a central body that is approving those amendments?
Essentially, yes. I mean, what we've had at the moment, and it's somewhat similar for specification and standard construction detailed amendments in contracts. While the method of measurement hasn't been something that required a departure, those other elements do. And the control mechanism for that, which is basically what it is, it's TII's control mechanism to understand what's going into contracts that are going to go out for national road schemes. The departures mechanism is the control system for doing that. Now, it doesn't need to be overly sort of unwieldy. A single departure can be put through for a contract set that's been put together, that the contract set is being overseen by whatever inspector or person within TII has that set, and once they're satisfied that the amendments that are being put through on that particular contract set are satisfactory from a TII point of view, the departure will be passed and it'll go through. So it's just a control mechanism. It's not intended to drive hundreds and hundreds of departures on each specific item, but that's what's intended. That's how it's intended to be used.
Yeah, so that we submission for the whole project on, that it make it administratively as simple as possible.
All right, is there any other questions? Going once? No? Nothing? No, I just had one question myself. Just understand you had advice notes. So does that mean that an advice note is now requires a departure if you're not going to follow it? Is it a full standard?
Well, advice notes typically don't have mandatory requirements in them in any event. So, the wording would typically be should do this, should do that. So departures are only required in relation to mandatory requirements. Now, there are some advice notes that are that do contain some mandatory requirements, and that's just something that sort of crept in over the years. So that's why it's really important that everyone's very clear on what are mandatory requirements within the documentation or otherwise. But if it's a guidance piece, then a departure is not required.
Okay, and then just one final thing.
Just at the bottom of the page, if it says standard, that's the key thing.
Okay. And interim advice notes then are placed under the technical documentation, but I suppose on some schemes they would be requirements. So that would become a contractual requirement as opposed to a standards requirement.
That's it, correct, okay. Yeah, because interim advice notes currently are not part of standards. So if they're to be used and implemented on any particular contract, they need to be done so by reference. So they get specifically brought into the contract and typically bound into the contract. There's no change really in that respect. So those documents remain as technical documents, and the same way as it is currently, any contract that wants to bring in any reference to specification or standards from outside TII system can do so, but obviously under TII's control system.
Okay, if you don't have any other questions, I'd... oh, we do have one, sorry.
Hello, Tony Harkins here. Why isn't there a longer period to allow the washed out of the existing contracts let up to the middle of May? Because given the hierarchy in the GCC forms of contract, you're going to have a contractual dispute.
Where do you see the contractual dispute coming?
Well,
Tony?
if the NRA cease to carry forward the existing suite of documents that they have, which are part of the existing contract system,
Yeah.
and there's only all that's available is the TII document.
Yeah, but all of the existing documentation is in the new system. So everything that's currently in the NRA standard system, including all of the archive documents, are all in the TII publication system.
But with a different reference number.
With a different reference number and reference to the historical reference number also. So the date of your contract and how you search for that document within the TI publication system is still going to get you to the document that you need in this new system.
But it'll be a new document, not an old one.
It will have the same content and same reference as the old document.
And it'll have both references.
It will have both references, yeah.
And you don't think that's going to cause a problem?
We don't think that's going to cause a problem, no.
So that
Well-
search the contract date was really the key.
Do you feel, Tony, that that is going to cause a problem?
Well, experience would indicate that it probably will do.
Okay. Well, look, that's something that we've talked that through, and our view in terms of how we're implementing the new system is that it's not going to cause a problem. But, you know, today was about launching the system, getting some feedback and listening to what people are saying. So it's useful to hear that, and we'll take that and put it under review.
You know, experience would indicate that if you run a parallel system for probably 18 months, and before you dump all the existing documentation by reference as they are at the moment, it might be a good idea.
Okay, well, we'll keep that under consideration. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
Okay. Final questions? Yep.
Hi, Miriam O'Brien here from Road Safety Matters. My query just relates really to something you've discussed already, I suppose, in relation to the difference between the standards and the advice notes. And it just boils down to wording, apparently, i.e. should, must versus may or could. So are we to, at our own discretion, read through documentation, standards or advice notes and determine what is mandatory or otherwise based on the wording in the documentation?
It's based on what's in the wording in the documentation.
Okay. So in an advice note, if it says must or should, that effectively makes it mandatory?
Yes,
Okay,
that's it.
thank you.
Any more questions?
Which one is it?
Just going forward, I think we'll have less and less advice notes. You know, that'll be either a standard or just background reading.
Sure.
The reason I ask is because the standards that I use most frequently, which are road safety related standards, have gone from, you know, being HD only and standards only to going back to advice notes now. So there's a bit of a grey area really in terms of how they should be treated, I think.
That's the recent one. Is it the recent one published, Miriam?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. So both, so we republished the HD and the HA documentation as well.
All right, now I'm just going to close this morning's session. Just thanks to Helen and Michael and Gavin. Obviously, an awful lot of work has gone into this new system, and it's an awful lot of information to take in. So I'm sure you'll be receiving questions over the next couple of months. But on behalf of the Structures and Construction Division and the Roads and Transportation Society, thanks very much for coming here this morning. And I just ask everyone just to show their appreciation in the usual manner. Thanks a lot.